Good morning, and Ian Burnett's with us from Highland. I'll let him pronounce the next bit. What is it, Ian?
Good morning, Kaye. It's the Highland Chocolatier, whichever way you like. Chocolatier.
Yes, your pronunciation is much better than mine. I'll stick with chocolate makers. Maybe that's going to be better. So Julie, it's a tale of differing experiences here. I mean, obviously, and it is sad. Thorntons has been such a well-recognised name for such a long time. Clearly, unable to deal with the pressures imposed by the pandemic. But chocolate is ever popular. What's going wrong?
I think the Thorntons is already or widely known for having a variety of flavours and different types of chocolate products suitable for every occasion. But I think people perhaps with their chocolate are looking for something that's a bit more unique. Of course, chocolate is eaten in different contexts and different situations. So if you're buying chocolate for someone else or you're self-gifting, you're perhaps more likely to look for something that has a bit of luxury, exclusivity associated with it, rather than something that you can get at the supermarket.
Yeah, chocolate does seem to have taken on this luxury element to it, rather than, your common and garden high street. There are so many, and I'm sure Ian's going to be able to tell us about some of the products that he has. But there's so many sort of high-end products now in the chocolate market at some incredible prices, Julie.
Yes, they can be very expensive, and I think often when you are giving chocolates, often as you do as a gift, people aren't necessarily overly conscious about what price they're going to pay. They want those chocolates to convey something to the person that they're giving the gift to, and they also want to convey something about themselves. So luxury chocolates are about wealth, exclusivity, it's about elegance. So it is very much something that isn't necessarily related to budget pricing.
Yeah, to some extent, did Thorntons maybe kind of fall in the middle, because it wasn't cheap, I mean, at a reasonable price. So, I mean, if you're desperate for your sugar hit, you might go into your local newsagents or whatever supermarket and get a bar of chocolate confectionery, as somebody once described it to me. Whereas if you're giving a gift, then you've got such a choice of some pretty fancy stuff. So maybe they were just stuck in the middle.
Yes, I think so. I mean, often when you're positioning yourself in the marketplace, you have to have what's known as points of parity, so similarities with the competition, but also points of differentiation. And where people aren't necessarily recognising your point of differentiation, they're going to look elsewhere.
Ian, what kind of year have you had then?
Oh, very mixed. It's been really challenging. I mean, all the Michelin star chefs I work with are obviously, closed overnight back in March and are struggling to come back. And, even the hotels and so on that we work with, we had a brief spell open last year, of course, but what's saved our bacon is the web sales. Is just literally managed, so I could keep all the staff on. And that's really been the saving grace.
Those are sort of sales to private customers that perhaps you wouldn't have had in the same volume previously.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few trade clients who are wanting to do, hampers and things like that. But there's a key thing we launched last year, which was like a tasting flight that we usually, people come up the road from Edinburgh, they come here, we exhibition, they have their tasting flight and so on, a wee audio guide. But just before the pandemic, we launched it as an online thing where you could actually send it to someone's home. So if you're in lockdown, you can't go anywhere. People would send a box to their family in France or another box to Devon or whatever. They get on Zoom and they do it together and have the audio guide. So there was an experience, I think, that we were creating that people could have. So it wasn't just like a box of chocolates, that people were getting given under lockdown. They were actually just, well, you'll know yourself, just desperate for some kind of experience. So
sure.
Creating that experiential side to it was really special. And that, those tasting flights alone are really what's kept us through.
Yeah, almost like a wine tasting.
It is exactly like that, and it's just a bit of fun. It's not all. It's a bit. You have to kind of guess what the flavours are and so on. So it's kind of fun, but you learn a bit along the way. And yes, you taste award-winning chocolate and so on, but you actually learn a bit. And I think that's what customers are getting more discerning about is what's behind the chocolate.
Well, and that's what's changed. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, it was your Twix, your Curly Wurly, your Mars bar, all of that kind of stuff. And it was, well, back in the day, 10, 20p or whatever. But the chocolate market has changed completely, and it's almost like the more you can pay, the better.
It's funny. There's two things you can pay for. I always think that you will get people who'll pay for the bling, the presentation, the really expensive box, or the brand name, or the marketing that brand is doing, and so on. And there's people, we've tried to, sell into 6-star hotels in the Middle East, and they're not interested because we don't have diamonds on the box. The chocolate's inside, irrelevant. But really, in my opinion, what you really should be paying for is what's inside, and that does have a difference in cost. It's like any fruit. The cocoa pods are no different. You can be paying for, the mass-produced, genetically modified, very fast processed. It's going to be very poor sort of blended chocolate you end up with at the end of the day. Or if you're going to have a farmer who's looking after his crop and not, harvesting it before it's ripe and looking after it really well, doing the fermentation, the drying correctly, not cutting any corners, and the same with the roasting and the conching, all these other steps to get you to the bar, it takes more time and it costs more money, and therefore you end up with, well, it's like any fruit or veg. If you look after it really well, it's going to taste better.
Yeah.
And that means you get more goodness in it too. So that, in my opinion, is worth paying for.
Yeah, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Ian, listen, we're out of time, but listen, thank you very much indeed, Ian Burnett from Highland Chocolatier.